great, brilliant person who is the author of Big Thought and many other wonderful things in our field. My name is Tom Wolf, and we're here to talk about More Than the Sum of Its Parts, which is a book, but it's also a very important idea that Gigi and I have shared for many, many years and finally got to write about. So let's get right into it with the first slide. And I'd like to begin by having you think about your situation. And I was very struck by the fact that our previous speaker had you do some breathing exercises and stuff like that. I won't ask you to do that, but I will ask you to put up your hand how many of you find yourself, can we have the next slide, please? Is there anybody advancing slides? Okay. The new nonprofit environment. How many of you find yourself working harder than ever? A lot of people, okay. How many of you find yourselves facing difficult financial challenges? Actually, I'd like to see a show of hands. How many people are not facing difficult financial challenges? Well, we'll all come to your workshop. How many of you are unsure how to leverage new technology and social media in your efforts? Okay. And how many of you worry about the long-term sustainability of your organization? Okay, well, that's what I call the new nonprofit environment. Those are the kinds of challenges we're dealing with. And if we can have the next slide, please, dealing specifically with the arts education environment, there is another challenge I think that we all face, which is that there are a lot of problems out there that seem to dwarf the problems that many of us are dealing with. There are the problems of unemployment, public education, workforce development, healthcare, and a whole range of problems in our communities that often seem so overwhelming that to gain the attention of people is very, very difficult. And that leads me to talk to you a little bit about how this book came to be. Some of you may remember that 3 or 4 years ago, the Kresge Foundation gave a grant to the Guild to explore the question of sustainability among arts education organizations. And they hired WolfBrown to spend a year talking to many of you, looking at model organizations and model programs. And I began with the notion that we would find the strongest options for sustainability, the strongest success stories for sustainability among the really large, old, established organizations. That's not what we found, actually. Some of the least sustainable organizations were some of the largest ones. And I should have thought about that, because when we think about the arts field generally, we think about those organizations that are really struggling today. We think of symphony orchestras in particular. They're very large and they're in trouble. But as we began to look around the country and talk to many of you, we began to see a pattern. And the pattern was very simple. We found that those organizations that seemed to be doing well seemed to share two characteristics. One characteristic was they really were formulating their mission around large community challenges. They weren't just talking about providing quality arts experiences to young people. They were talking about these issues of equity and quality education. The other thing that we found over and over again was that the organizations that were sustainable were those organizations which had established very strong partnerships. Often partnerships within their own sector with other arts providers, but just as often partnerships across sectors. So we would find organizations, for example, that were working with prisons, or were working in healthcare, or working in a whole variety of areas that had very strong partnerships and very strong funding bases as a result of it. So those two elements led us to a kind of hypothesis that we spent the next year testing, and pretty much coming out of it feeling like this was something that we needed to share more broadly. And basically what it was is a strong commitment to broad community issues plus partnership equals sustainability. And of course, Gigi's organization, Big Thought, is such an incredible exemplar of that, that when it came time to think about writing a book about it, I thought, well, why write the book myself? Why not just collaborate with Gigi and sit at her feet and write down all of her good ideas, which is how this book came to be. The book starts by talking about this issue of developing a mission and developing activities which go well beyond arts education. And one of the organizations that we profile in the book is Mural Arts in Philadelphia. Mural Arts, by the way, go on their website sometime, because the language around what they do is so compelling. One of the things that I love about looking at their website is this quote, "It ain't about the paint." In other words, it's about something much broader. Mural Arts, many of you know, came into being as an anti-graffiti organization. And it provided for young people an alternative way to express themselves. It was positive, creating murals, and looking at ways to go well beyond, as the website says, art saves lives. What drives us is the opportunity to help life triumph over the forces of despair. We just happen to be good at painting murals. And so neighborhood cleanup, neighborhood development programs, educational initiatives, a variety of initiatives that spoke to the people of Philadelphia, whether or not they were interested in arts education. And now this has become one of the most successful models in the country.
So in talking with Tom about this, and as we began to shape it, this idea of looking at all of these examples of arts organizations that haven't abandoned the sort of arts for art's sake, in other words, the quality of the instruction that's going on and the art that's being taught isn't less than it was before, but the way it's framed and the benefits and the impact of children taking part in high quality arts education programs, or communities organizing around that idea and making visible the work in the community, seems to have clearly, and I think Big Thought is a great example of this, a lot of different opportunities. It puts the arts at highly valued civic tables that are about big issues that our communities are facing. Issues like the quality of public education, issues like the health and wellness of our young people, issues like the strength and safety of our communities. Those are issues that are being talked about in my community at a civic level by the mayor and by the business community. And when the arts can become a part of the solution of these highly valued civic outcomes without compromising the experience that we're actually delivering to children, we become less on the margins and more in the center. And we have great benefits as organizations from doing that. And on the slide are a few of them. Stronger finances. It opens up streams of funding and support from places that we could never, with strictly an arts education frame, ever hope to tap into. Things like safe communities, things like juvenile justice money, or even police dollars for after-school environments. Things like big movement in my community right now around obesity. And so it opens up partnerships with hospitals, with our government, with and also federal funding opportunities, not just U.S. Department of Education, if we're lucky, NEA, thank God for them, but other places that we can look in our federal government, in our state, and in our local funding sources for funding. So it strengthens our ability to have multiple strands of income coming in. We can be more effective. And I think the conversation this morning is a part of that. If we're joining in with larger communities of people who are advocating and organized, we have a broader community in which to do our work in a more authentic context for our kids. We have a much wider reach when we work together than we could ever hope to happen alone. A very good example is, in this community, a focus on summer learning loss, which has got money behind it. It's money we're already spending in our school district and in our community. When the arts become a part of that conversation, the program becomes more effective, the kids are more successful, and we're able to do that work without additional funding. It's really just a matter of leveraging. We're more effective when we work together than we are separately. We have a much wider reach. We can have a deeper impact, and we are much more visible. Because all of a sudden, people who never got that art thing, thought it was playing, begin to see that it's actually a powerful, transformative experience that can enhance our whole community. Not just that it makes beautiful art, although it does that too. I shouldn't say not just. It does that as well as these other things. It brings a kind of legitimacy that brings us out of the fringes and more into the center. And in the end, together we survive stronger, we have more capacity to reach our mission, and we're able to be more sustainable. And at the end, we can grow and build on that, rather than hanging on by our fingernails every day trying to figure out how to get the next thing done. It's a very different mindset. Instead of pulling, we're apart or against each other, we're pushing together. It doesn't become about STEM or arts, it becomes about STEM and arts. And that is a stronger, it makes the science stronger and it makes the arts stronger too. The deal is this, is that this thing that Tom and I are talking about doing, that we're saying, oh, it's really great if you partner and if you do that, it's really not always the right thing to do, and it's not easy to do, because it does require that you think and work in a different way. And before you enter into a partnership and you think about those, these are the set of questions, the criteria, that I think you have to ask yourself. So if you're going into a partnership or collaboration, why are you connecting with this other organization or partnering with this organization? Are you complementary? Do you bring things that are different together in a way that actually equals more than what you're doing separately? And what is it that you really want from each other? So it's sort of the deal breaker question. You know, you're engaging in this partnership, we're considering engaging in this partnership. What is it that you need to happen? I'll give you a really good example. Working with a public school system. So why do they want community arts in the system? What is it that's really at the heart of their agenda? And what is the thing that if it doesn't happen will mean that it's a failure in their eyes, may not be in yours, but may be in theirs? And what is it that you're hoping to gain by entering into this partnership or this collaboration? And can you be explicit about that so that you're sure that that connection is happening? There are times when it's not good. You know, we may get approached by, the NFL project that we did is a really, really good example. So, the National Football League is interested in collaborating with Big Thought. It was a big disconnect for us. It was hard to imagine how that partnership would actually propel the mission of both of those organizations. But through conversation, we were able to see the place where our agendas aligned and move forward and serve 44,000 young people and raise the visibility of the arts in our community beyond what we could have imagined, because what they had was a big white spotlight that everybody was looking at. And do the finances work? So, are we really going to supplement the National Football League, a for-profit it's basically a group of billionaires who with a group of millionaires that are playing the game. I mean, it's really, so what's the relationship between a nonprofit and a very, and how do you talk about that? Are you all going to come out together well financially? Community trust and visibility working together. And this was a big issue in this project. They are a very, they have a real brand. And so what is the brand with an arts brand, and how does that connect? And then can what we need to do better than we could do apart? And again, it's about what do both of those things bring to the table. It's important when you think about a collaboration, particularly if you're small compared to this really big thing that you're about to collaborate with, a school district or the NFL. So you're just a peanut in that big machine. What is the value that you bring, and what are the values of those two institutions? And can you really align your agendas financially, programmatically, culturally, and can you both come together without compromising the values of your institution and what you believe in?
I was actually very disappointed when Gigi first told me about the collaboration with the NFL, because I had a suggestion for her which she did not take, which was that I be the backup quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. However, I think the plan that she came up with was really quite excellent. I want to talk a little bit about old model, new model, by talking about a collaboration that I'm very familiar with. I think about, I work, Denny, my wife and I have been working with Carnegie Hall's Musical Connections program for the last 4 years, which is a program which puts musicians in hospitals and prisons and homeless shelters and places like that, working often with young people. And the old model was that the arts institution would design a program, enrichment program for the people who were needy, and would deliver the program and would hope that it took. Now, there's a very different form of planning and collaboration that happens with the Musical Connections program, because the arts organization is really looking to the partner to define its goals and its needs and designing a program which is appropriate. Let me give you an example. Jacobi Medical Center, one of the largest public hospitals in the country, is in the Bronx in New York. A very poor neighborhood where most of the people only use the hospital when they're very, very sick, and they use the emergency room. It's a very expensive way to deliver health care. And what they said when they talked to Carnegie Hall was, if you were really going to help us address a problem, it would be changing the attitude of our local community in terms of the hospital and how to use the hospital. Well, that sounds almost impossible. What can an arts organization do? The solution was to design these incredible health music fairs so that Carnegie Hall would come and deliver these wonderful musical programs which would be promoted in the community. They were free, and people could come, and nonprofit organizations could bring busloads. But they also were told that if they came an hour early, they could get blood pressure screening, they could get counseling on diet, they could get various kinds of health care, they could get medication. And basically, through this collaboration of music and health, Carnegie Hall was able to address a need of the community and a need of the hospital by a completely different way of thinking about how you work collaboratively in a partnership.
And so, Tom, so that was what the hospital's outcome was, what you stated. What was Carnegie's?
Carnegie Hall's...
What did they get out of that
what they get out of
that
it...
they couldn't have gotten without the hospital?
Carnegie Hall's mission is to transform lives through music. And they are very committed to the idea that they want to transform the lives of people other than the people who can pay $100 for a ticket and come to Carnegie Hall. Their need was, how do we meaningfully get out into the community to have these opportunities? And it's not so easy. You don't just sort of send a bunch of musicians to a prison and knock on the door and say, here we are, let us in. So what they were getting was the opportunity to gain access to the kinds of populations they wanted to serve with these transformative experiences.
So a whole new audience.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
The next three slides really address, which Tom is going to go through, really address this idea of thinking about collaboration, partnership, and more than the sum of its parts through different lenses. So it's not as if you're looking for a partnership or collaboration to do everything that you do. But it's a very specific piece of a problem that you're trying to solve. In this case with Carnegie, it was how do we get access to audiences in an authentic way, in a place-based way that will further our mission. Here's a couple of examples of kinds of partnerships that have been really successful around discrete benefits to a collection of organizations.
No, let's have the next slide.
The next slide.
And I think one of the takeaways from this is that it's not only the Carnegie Halls that can do this. Many of you know Kate Yoder. Kate, are you here? No, not today. Kate started a community music school, and of course the first thing she needed was a building, and she had basically no money. But what she did have was a very willing partner in the West Concord Church that had a beautiful building but was losing membership and needed to find uses for the building other than its Sunday service. And so they formed a collaboration which over the years not only involved having kids in the building, but jointly working on reconfiguring the building both to meet the needs of the church for handicapped access and things that they needed, and also to help the Concord Concord Conservatory get itself established. This is the Concord Conservatory in Massachusetts. I love the idea, I love the concept of the other one here in Gadsden. Gadsden is in Alabama. They had an old department store, and the mayor was very concerned about the fact that the downtown was being abandoned and what was going to happen with this department store. And so the city renovated the store. It owns it, it subsidizes it, and it created this foundation that runs the Hardin Center, and the Hardin Center has 3 galleries: Center Stage Presents, Imagine Place, which is a children's museum, a community school for the arts, a youth orchestra, and a literacy organization, Gadsden Reads. They share services, and what brought the city into this partnership with all of these arts organizations, literacy organizations, and with the reason it had its motivation, which is downtown development, downtown revitalization. These organizations need buildings. They needed to find efficiencies in terms of shared services.
So by shared services, you're talking about copy machines,
Right.
All of those things which you're likely, if you're running an organization, you're spending 15% at minimum on your overhead. So if there's a way to split that and not duplicate it by bringing together a group of organizations, that's not a programmatic partnership, but it still allows you to have a different way to deploy your resources to expand your programs.
In fact, on the next slide, one of the granddaddies of the shared services one, a model that I really love is the one in Chattanooga, where you have 3 organizations, an aquarium, an art museum, and a children's museum, which established a shared services consortium, which includes financial management, human services, technology infrastructure, and marketing. And so they have one director of finance, they have one marketing department, and these staff members report to each of the separate boards. One of the things that was really interesting about this was the aquarium, which is the giant organization here. I think they have something like a $60 million budget, some huge, ridiculously high budget, found itself with a lot of excess capacity. So for it, this was an opportunity to justify some of those expenses. And of course, for the smaller organizations, this was an opportunity to save money on the services themselves. And just a couple of other examples before we move on. If we can have the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about mergers and acquisitions. By a merger, I mean combining two or more entities into a single legally constituted nonprofit. Have any of you ever been to Redding, California? Okay. You know that Redding is in Northern California on the I-5 corridor. I-5 is the major interstate. And the frustration that this little city had was that millions of people went from California to Oregon and back on that I-5 corridor, passing essentially through Redding, but Redding couldn't capture them as tourists or as visitors. And it was looking for some kind of a very high visibility tourism development, economic development project. At the same time, there were 4 or 5 nonprofit organizations that were kind of on the margin of just getting by. One was the Redding Museum of Art and History, which was in a city building. Shasta Natural Science Association, also in a city building, getting city funding. A forest museum, a new alliance that was developing property on the Sacramento River for an arboretum. And the city said, look, we want to do something extremely high profile for tourism development and economic development. They got the big foundation behind the project, and they said to the nonprofits, it was a little bit of a carrot and stick situation. They said, we would like you to enter into a merger. Of course, you don't have to do it, but you're going to be thrown out of the buildings that you're in, which are city buildings, and you're not going to get any more city subsidy. And by the way, the foundation isn't going to give you money anymore. So there was kind of an incentive to enter the discussion. It was very, very difficult. It took 2 years, but today we have in Redding the Turtle Bay Exploration Park, serving not only economic development, but education. There's a charter school there. There are 14,000 students that come to that facility, 150,000 visitors annually. All of those organizations, plus others, joined that consortium. There's a single merged organization. And eat your heart out, Dallas, the first Calatrava Bridge in America was not in Dallas, but in Redding, California, at the Turtle Park Exploration Park. So that's really an interesting example of a merger. On the bottom, you see Bay Chamber Concerts. Bay Chamber Concerts is a little tiny concert organization up in Rockport, Maine. And for many, many years, they produced very high quality concerts. And they were, in the early 1990s, ready to launch a capital campaign. And they hired someone to do a feasibility study and to tell them how much money they could raise from the community. And the person came back and said, guess what? Except for your loyal donors, most people in the community think you're irrelevant. You do these high-quality chamber music concerts, but you don't have any relationship to the community. You really got to get involved in education. You got to get involved in community activities. And the board sort of thought about all of this and said, well, it's a lot of work to start something from scratch. Meanwhile, there were 1 or 2 organizations in the community that were already doing things. One was a string orchestra program called the Odeon String Orchestra Program. It was completely school-based and after-school-based, a darling of all the kind of local funders in town, of which there were some. It was getting to the point where the volunteers couldn't handle it anymore. They were thinking about maybe it was time to incorporate and become a 501c3. Bay Chamber Concerts turned to them and said, hey, guess what? We can provide you everything you need in terms of an umbrella. Would you become a base program of our organization? Because someday we want to have a community music school, and we think this is a way to get there. And within a year, Odeon became a program within Bay Chamber Concerts. It was an acquisition. It was sort of absorbed. And 5 years later, it became the nub of what is now the Bay Chamber Community Music School. So mergers and acquisitions are also ways beyond collaboration that organizationally you can change the structure of the organization and make it more efficient and more effective toward these larger community goals.
So we've talked about shared facilities and buildings, talked about shared services, and we've talked about shared governance, basically, through acquisitions and mergers. So I'm going to talk with you a little bit about partnerships that are at a programmatic level, which is another way that you can think about coordination and partnerships. So the organization that I run has two big major partners programmatically, and they are our public school system and our city infrastructure. And by that I mean primarily rec centers, libraries, and then our police department and the work that they're doing in community policing. Those are our primary partners that we collaborate with programmatically. We also have a set of over 100 other arts and cultural organizations that partner with us and with these larger institutions. And what we come together to do is address highly valued civic problems that are being talked about at our school district and our city level about developing the young people of Dallas. And we co-create programmatic models, and we mingle public and private money, and we share human resources to execute these programs in our community. It's a programmatic partnership. It's based on direct services to kids and how we're going to deliver them. But it's about how they're packaged, coordinated, and paid for that we work together. So I'm going to share a couple of, go ahead and give us the next slide. I'd like to correct something that Jonathan said. It isn't 115 kids that we work with in this community. It's 115,000 children that we work with in this community through this partnership. Okay. Well, I figured, but just for clarification, it is quite a difference between 115 and 115,000. And some of these kids, so one of the things that we're trying to do, because we're partnering, remember, with these big public institutions, their agenda, remember this is aligning agendas, they have, Margie Reese coined this term, the first time I ever heard it was when she was the director of the Office of Cultural Affairs, speaking from a city perspective. And she said, I have, as a city, the obligation to I have no obligation to serve any child in this community. I have an obligation to serve every child in this community because they are the city, and that's their obligation. It's the same with the school district. So the scale at which we can, as a community, offer solutions to our public institutions has to involve an element of scale, because for them, that's a deal breaker. They're much more interested in solving a problem for every kid in every elementary school in Dallas than they are in a really great boutique program that we can replicate in 5 or 10 or 15 campuses. We have 156 elementary schools in our city. So how can we come together to serve at scale a program of kids in the arts that we feel has integrity from our side of the fence? which is the quality of the experience the kids are having. That's the problem that we have to solve programmatically. And here's the way that we go about doing that. So the first thing that we think about is who's good at what. So it's that idea of who's got expertise and who's going to take the lead on different aspects of this work. And that might also have to do with money. Who has the funding and where's it coming from? And it may also have to do with who have the people that have the expertise, and how is that going to come together? Who's going to be responsible for what? It can also be down at a operational level. All right, Big Thought's going to take responsibility for grant writing around this project, because we have better grant writers, I promise you, than our school district has. So we have more expertise at that level. So it could be instructional, but it could also be about actually putting the partnership together. Who's going to do what? The second is just to take stock and research. So what is it that we know about the problem we're trying to solve? So here's an example. I'm going to talk about the summer learning loss program that we're working on right now in the city. So what we know about summer learning loss is that it hits our Black and brown children and kids living in poverty much harder than it hits the other children in our community. We know that high quality instruction is really important around language arts, math, reading, in order to address summer learning loss. But we also know that high quality summer learning loss programs involve enrichment. That's what they call it. And we know, right, on our side of the fence, that the best kind of enrichment is the kind of rocket fuel that creativity and the arts bring to kids. So we know what we have. We know what is good, right? We have best practices to look at. And we each have something strong to bring to the table, because I have great teaching artists, but they're not particularly trained to do high quality instruction in language arts math, right? So by putting our stuff together, we can do that. Then we look at the strategies to bridge the gaps in what we have. So what are we missing? We don't have curriculum that links what we're doing in the arts to what's being taught in the classroom. We don't have the tools we need to make explicit connections between those two things. And there's a whole other list of gaps that we don't have. And then we try some stuff out. We pilot, we try it out, and we keep talking about, and we measure, and we keep talking about how is it. And this is an ongoing conversation that we're having around this project. And it's financial, it's about administration, it's about execution, and it's about instruction. It's at all those levels. But what's possible for us to do, we provide for 15,000 children every summer, 15,000 kids at 10, 12 sites a year. Every kid in our community that's at danger of not matriculating to the next grade level gets a program like this that is making a difference in addressing summer learning loss. Our impact is greater, and it does not cost us 1 penny more than we were spending when we were trying to do all of this separately. But we've made a big difference. Can you go to the next one? Next slide, please. So, these are the steps of getting started and being successful that we've learned through experience and by looking at great examples, many of which are in this room, of organizations that do this work well. So identifying the community need. Our kids are losing 2 months of learning every summer, and everybody's concerned about the achievement gap. There's no higher priority in my community than that. Secondly, what's the powerful idea? The powerful idea is that if we coordinate the community to support the schools, we can do this at scale. Pretty powerful idea. We design it together, we try it out, and we're very successful. This is my thing that we talk about all the time. We're innovating, right? So if at least 20% of what you're trying to do isn't successful, then you're not risking enough. So if 75% of what we try to do the first time we do this is a win, that's a big win because nobody's ever done it before. We're innovating. So we have to be okay to fail. You've got to try things out and be willing to stick with it and get it better over time. We're able to scale, and we're able to keep pulling more and more people aboard as we go along. And those are the major things. It's not short, it's ongoing. You keep working on it, you keep moving it forward, and you build support and momentum in that way.
Great. I just want to say one thing about identifying community needs before we go to the next slide. How do you know what your community needs are? Most communities have done a lot of research. They have surveyed. There are many things that exist in the community. You don't have to do it yourself. One of the most interesting ones, again, having been in Chattanooga recently, they had a big renaissance around the new millennium, and they redeveloped their waterfront. They were often called the most polluted city in the country. They completely cleaned themselves up, but they did all of this, and then they said, okay, what's next? So they created a community survey. They ended up getting 26,000 responses. 5% of the city actually responded to this survey. And they went to all kinds of different places, so it was very diverse in terms of the responses. And based on that survey, the STAND survey, when they went and did the cultural plan, when the arts organizations got together and did a cultural plan, they based their vision not so much on arts goals, but on the goals that had emanated from the community around economic development, environment, education, public safety, and were able to formulate the vision for the arts and for arts education around those broader community goals. The result, county mayor, city mayor, both volunteered to be co-leaders of the cultural plan effort. Major corporations in town got behind it. So it got the kind of community resonance that would never have happened if this was about making our arts organizations play a little bit better and calling them, excellent, high-quality arts product. That's important. I don't diminish that. But in terms of the long-term sustainability of our sector, we need to be looking at these broader community goals. If we could have the next slide.
I'd like to add that it's also, I read the paper and I listen to my local news. And I hear every day the issues and the things that are important to our community. And so surveying is an important way to refine, but the problems are not hard to get a hold of because they're in the news. They're in the paper, they're in the op-ed section. These are the things that are hot in your community. That's why they're there. And the question is, how do you respond to that so that you think about the arts and your institution as a part of the broader conversation that's going on in your community about making the community stronger and better. And I want to say just a word about language. So this summer learning labs, I keep talking about it because I've introduced it to you now, but we do this actually in many, many different ways. When we go out and raise money for or talk to our partners about this initiative, we don't say that it's an arts program. We don't frame it that way. We say it's a summer learning loss intervention program. Now on my side of the fence, what I'm most interested in my responsibility and my partner's responsibility in the arts community is to provide what we know is high quality arts education. That's never a negotiable point. So it's not that that's not happening. It's just not the way we talk about it. It's not the way we frame it. We're able to move people who aren't interested in arts education. It's not on their radar screen. Over to our side of the fence because we talk to them we begin our conversation with them in a frame that is meaningful to them. And it's hard sometimes for, I think, organizations to not lead with the thing that's your thing. But it isn't always the best way to communicate. I mean, we write grants that don't have the word art in it ever, because we're going after education money. And that's not necessarily an asset in building a case. That's wrong. It should be. I think it's terrible, but that it isn't personally. But the truth is that that's not the frame that we're working in. And we have to adopt the language and communicate our value in the value system of the institutions and the partnerships that we are that we're working in and partnering with. And that's a communication issue. It's not an arts education issue. It's a communications issue. And partnership and collaboration is a lot about communication.
When we were working on this book, and I was literally sitting with my notepad taking notes, and I would ask Gigi a question. And one of her concepts when we were writing this book was this notion of creating a powerful idea. So I said, okay, Gigi, what do you mean by a powerful idea? And she came up with 4 words, and I want to tell you what they were because I think this is really fantastic.
I wonder what I said.
Focused, inspirational, achievable, and measurable. Let me do those again. This is Gigi at her best. A powerful idea, focused, inspirational, achievable, and measurable. And as we look at the roles and tasks here, one of the most important things, and the last thing I'm going to talk about here, is evaluation and accountability. There are 2 kinds of evaluation. There's one kind of evaluation which is very, very useful, where people come in and they work with you in terms of program development. They look at the program, they give you a sense of what's working, what's not working, and that's called formative evaluation. That's extremely important. It's good to have people from the outside looking at your program. But there's another kind, which is called summative evaluation, and that's the evaluation where you set measurable goals and you actually look and see whether those goals are achieved. And based on that, based on the achievement of those goals, you are in a position to go out and make a claim that you are actually doing what you said you were going to do. You've set goals for yourself, and you're achieving those goals. One important thing is make sure the goals you set are, as Gigi said, word number 3, achievable. Because you want to more than perform more than what you say you're going to do. You want to overachieve, I guess is my sense. Anything you want to say on this slide before we go to some questions?
No, I think we've covered it. I do this thing of focused and and achievable. It's the thing that you're achieving together. That's the thing that you want to measure when you're talking about these kinds of programs. It's not my agenda, which is the quality of the instruction. We do measure that. Without question, because we want to make sure that we're reaching that goal. But when we're going out and talking about this, the goal that we lead with is we're going to stem summer learning loss together. And that's not something Big Thought does, and it's not something the district's doing. It's something that we're doing together. Because the district's been doing this for years and years and has been unsuccessful reaching that goal. And we, as an arts community, we have been providing summer enrichment opportunities for children, but we haven't achieved that either. But together, when we put it together, we really can be more effective for kids. That's the powerful measurement, that people are willing to invest in that. And as we raise money, and as we raise friends, and as we raise support to propel this work forward, that's the thing. And that's a very difficult and uncomfortable, I don't have to stem summer learning loss because of the enrichment component in that program. What I am responsible for is doing it in partnership with this institution, this other institution. And that's the thing we agree together to come together and work towards. And that's That's different than the way I would think about just our outcomes, of what we're doing.